At this point, I'm 52 years old. I don't want to say I'm not going to be aggressive or take some risk, but starting over at the age of 44 taught me a lot. So I'm perfectly content with being somewhat conservative at this stage of the game.
Hey everybody, this is the 0 to 100 podcast, and with me are my trusty sidekicks, my great number 2 and number 3, Gabe Hamill and Mitch England. And it's good to be back, man. I've been gone for the last couple of weeks in Maui and Oklahoma City, which is a definite culture shock between the two. Yeah, what's the 0 to 100 podcast? We are all about how do you scale in real estate? How do you build a portfolio responsibly but quickly, and a portfolio that generates enough passive income? Passive being the operative word. You're not fixing toilets. You're not running applications. And how does this passive income cover your living lifestyle expenses and allow you to achieve retirement number 1 or R1? We have a book. We have a mastermind, and we have this podcast. Mitch has his book, shamelessly plugging the book behind him there. So go check it out. Go read it. We have a framework called the R1 framework. This stuff works, man. We interview guests every week that have scaled their portfolio and have done this or are in the journey of scaling a portfolio. Today's guest is a little different. Not different bad, different good. So we've got John Fisher on the call with us today, and John is a broker. John Fisher, he also calls himself Mr. Landman. That actually confused me, John. I was looking at your bio. I'm like, wait, is it Fisher or is it Landman? But I think that's a branding thing, and I think we'll get into that in a second with mobile home parks and farms and things like that. But if you haven't been under a rock for the last several years and you are investing in mobile home parks especially, or maybe multifamily properties, you will have most certainly received one of John's newsletters, which is awesome. I can't imagine how powerful that newsletter is. I do want to get into that because there's some parallels between some of our listeners that are trying to get deals and are trying to build thought leadership in newsletters and the effectiveness and how you built that. Because it is, I mean, I think, like I said, Gabe was like, oh yeah, John, yep, got your newsletter. Mitch and I are like, yep, we got your newsletter. I think my mom gets your newsletter too, and she doesn't even invest in mobile home parks. So that's impressive. So I'll get into your bio here. So John was raised on a 5th generation family farm just south of Champaign, Illinois. I'm assuming Champaign didn't come from Illinois, right? That's overseas. But anyway, he attended a Unity High School in Tolano, Illinois. Did I say that right?
Tolano.
Okay. He's a senior class president. John also participated in sports and music in high school. After graduating high school, John attended the University of Illinois and majored in agricultural economics. However, the majority of the classes were geared towards advertising and marketing. That's interesting. John was elected as one of the 4 freshman representatives to the University of Illinois Council. After college, John ventured into the pioneering realm of swine genetics, which everybody usually does that when they get out of college. He got into swine genetics, and he transformed a humble startup into a global enterprise that captured the attention of renowned publications such as Newsweek and the New York Times. In recognition of his unwavering dedication, John was honored with the prestigious 2015 Illinois Friends of Agriculture Award by Governor Bruce Rauner, and a testament to his exemplary contributions to agriculture in the state of Illinois. Whew. So you're an entrepreneur. Okay, that's cool. You're an investor, you're an entrepreneur prior to being a broker. After 22 years of business, John found himself burned out and wanting to tackle new opportunities in life, like I do every day after talking to Mitch. He closed down the genetic business on June 1st, 2017, and he became a licensed realtor in November of 2017, and is overjoyed to once again look forward to going to work every morning. John is now licensed in 25 states, selling mostly commercial properties outside of Illinois. He sells farms throughout Illinois and Indiana and residential properties generally within a 60-minute radius of the Champaign urban area. So, John, welcome to the podcast. We're super happy to have you. This is going to be interesting, and we're going to dive into your story here. But I think for those of you that are listening and trying to work with brokers and trying to get brokers' attention, because people don't understand is oftentimes brokers are the number one source of off-market deals. You have sellers that don't necessarily want to be public with it, but they want to feel out potentially exiting a property, and they reach out to a guy like John. And why would they reach out to a guy like John? Because John has the minds, the ears, and the attention of investors throughout the country. And so it's a really great fit. John is connecting sellers and buyers, and everybody wins. So welcome to the show. And John, you're in Illinois now. I was reading your bio also. You have a nice beachfront condo in Hilton Head. Looks like you're not there. Looks like you're bundled up. Someone's going to be here in Illinois.
I actually booked 2 flights there this morning for later in the year. So
You got to get out of town. It's too cold.
yeah,
Then you got to get that vitamin D. Like I said, just being in Maui for a week changes everything. Getting back to the dark gray Northwest. So, all right, John. So, welcome to the show, man. I want to dig into your story a little bit. Let's go back to, you've been an entrepreneur, you've been in real estate, you're an investor. I do want to get into your own portfolio a little bit, because it certainly makes a lot of sense. You know, if you're an investor yourself, you understand how investors think. And I want to get into the mind of a kick-ass, commercial broker. We want to get in the mind of like what's happening in the market today. What are sellers talking about? What are buyers doing? We've sort of been in a gridlock over the last year or two when it comes to sellers expecting certain prices. The interest rate environment, as we know, has been very hostile, which isn't friendly to investors. So John, go back to maybe before all of this. Have you always been, you got into pig genetics and a business, which is super niche, by the way. I love niche, go niche or go broke. Let's go back to like young John. What drives you, man? Like, tell us your story before we got into your bio there.
well, I think my goals growing up is I wanted to be a sports announcer. And my sister went into radio and TV broadcasting, and there's, as you know, just not a lot of money in that field. So my parents very strongly encouraged me to kind of go into something different. So I went into agriculture and, thought maybe I'd get into the board of trade or something along those lines. I had a 4-H swine project that got, I guess the best way to describe it would be out of control. And by the time I was ready to graduate from college, artificial insemination, I was going to say AI, but now everyone thinks of a different type of AI. But artificial insemination back in 1995 was really becoming popular. I was also a licensed auctioneer at the time, and I wanted to be able to continue to do some auctions. I wasn't quite ready to get rid of the pigs, and artificial insemination was becoming commonplace throughout the Midwest. So I thought, what every kid does, why don't I just sell pig semen for a living?
What I did, but I went military instead.
Yeah. So that's kind of where it started, and started a very humble and first 2 years were pretty slow, and about 1998 things picked up a little bit, and 2001 I had the world's first commercially cloned pigs, and the first ones cloned by somatic cell nuclear transfer. Would have been a great deal for me had the USDA not shut me down. There was no laws in favor of clones. There was no laws against clones. There was just no policy at all. So they basically imposed a moratorium saying I couldn't sell semen on these clones that I'd put a fair amount of money into. But I guess I can have that on my tombstone or my 15 minutes of fame for having those first cloned pigs.
Yeah, this is like the 4th semen salesman we've had on the podcast.
It's really, really, yeah. It's like a funnel for mobile home parks.
I realize this isn't like an ag show or a pig semen show, but man, I have
so many questions. There's not a question I haven't heard. Trust me.
You got out of control, by the way.
Yeah, a 4-H project that got out of control. Yeah, I got my dad bought me my first pig or pigs when I was 8. I started showing at the county fairs and state fairs, and it just kind of mushroomed out of control.
So you weren't really trying to start a business. At what point, I'm just curious, like at what point, did this project become, you're like, wow.
By the time I was a junior in college, I started putting everything together.
I also love how you said I started 4-H, I had a pig, and then it got out of control and I started selling semen to a lot of people. It just, the setup is crushing me.
Well, I was very fortunate. My timing was great. There was not a lot of people really embracing technology in the world of swine production back in the mid to late 90s. And I was fortunate enough to jump early onto the internet fad. I got a website and started advertising my boars, my sires all over the country. I could put videos up, I could put pictures, and ironically enough, I had the domain showpigs.com. And when I shut this enterprise down there in 2017, despite nearly 20 years of that time of pornography and everything seedy you can think about on the dark web, if you were to do a search on semen on Google, I was almost always in the top 10 to 15 results.
That's fascinating. So, John, I have a question that I think a lot of our listeners will wonder too. How do you go from that into being a mobile home park broker?
Apparently I can't do anything normal. As I've got my hat here, make trailer parks great again.
I
Oh my
love
gosh,
that.
that's great. That's great. You need to send me one of those, John.
I was burnt out. I was not in great shape financially. I'd kind of been treading water since 2012 after a divorce. And then just a couple of things that happened in 2017. I didn't have a great spring at all. And the bank wasn't calling the note on me yet, but I don't think they were probably too far away. And this was a business at this point, even the years that I was making money, I wasn't enjoying it. And I certainly wasn't enjoying the years where I was breaking even or losing money.
I got a question really fast, John, that digs into like your brain. Because it's funny because a lot of entrepreneurs, I remember I had a business that essentially failed and I was like, well, I'm just going to go start another business. And people are like, why wouldn't you just go get a job? I'm like, what do you mean? Why would I get a job? That's ridiculous. Like, what was your mindset when you were burnt out and you're ready to wrap the ag business down? What was your mindset? What got you into real estate? Why did you pick real estate? Why did you pick that? But also, like, why didn't you go get a job? You're highly educated, or maybe you're like the rest of us. We're not employable.
Well, apparently, pig semen sales does not look desirable on a resume. I applied for a number of jobs for probably the better part of 4.5 months. I didn't get one interview. I went 4.5 months without one interview. I'd applied for a grain buying position at a local elevator that might have started me at $35,000 or $40,000 a year. And about 2 weeks later, I get an email saying, Mr. Fisher, we don't feel you're qualified for this position. And I'm like, 22 years of international agribusiness experience, the 2015, Friend of Agriculture Award winner, and I'm not qualified to be a grain buyer. So that was the final straw. I went home. I took my American Express card out. I bought a real estate course, and 30 days later, I had my license, and here I am.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist, really, but it is interesting that I wonder if like these people in these HR departments are like, oh, John doesn't fit the W-2 sort of clone that we're looking for, the clock in at 8, clock out at 5. And I've heard that like people like me or Arun, I couldn't go back and clock in, clock out. But it's interesting. That's a different perspective that HR departments are looking at you, a successful entrepreneur that has done this for 22 years and has had all of these accolades. And you're not. I wonder what they're looking for. Again, that's just deep thoughts by Travis Diller. But like,
I had never been employed previously. I've been self-employed since, I've always worked on the farm with my dad, or I started my business, when I was in college. So I've never had a job. But I thought it might be nice to have a check, a steady check every 2 weeks and benefits, all that stuff that, we don't have necessarily.
What year was that you got your real estate license?
17.
In 2017. And then where'd you go from there?
Yeah. So in Illinois, you're required to be under a managing broker or another brokerage for the first 2 years of your career. And I needed it. I mean, I had a background in swine production and agriculture, but I didn't know a whole heck of a lot about real estate by any means. I was somewhat familiar with some of the laws just because I was and had been a licensed auctioneer since 1992. So I got my license. I went to work for Coldwell Banker, and I was selling a few houses. As I mentioned, I was an auctioneer. At that time, I was licensed in Illinois and Indiana. So since I was licensed in Illinois for real estate, and I'm only 45 miles or so from the Illinois-Indiana border, I'm like, I'll go ahead and get my license in Indiana as well in case I get any farmland opportunities over there. So I had to meet with another brokerage over there, and it was just kind of a God thing. I was 6 or 7 months into real estate at this time. I had sold some houses. I hadn't listed anything. At that time, I would have listed a strip bar, any seedy establishment you could have imagined. I would have listed it just to finally get a listing. And that second brokerage from Indiana, out of the blue, again, it was a God thing. Some lady from Indianapolis had called them and said, "Hey, I own a mobile home park in Taylorville, Illinois. Will you guys sell it for me?" And they're like, "Well, we only sell farms. We don't really have any desire. However, we just brought on a guy from Illinois. If it's okay, we can check and see if he's interested." So they called me and they said, "We have a list. I'll take it." Didn't know anything about mobile home parks. Virtually nothing. I had a friend here in Champaign County. She had a small 9 or 10 pad. And I called her. I'm like, what can you tell me? So she told me about Mobile Home Park University Sport. She told me about Crexy. She kind of taught me how it works a little bit. So I knew just enough to be dangerous to write my bio for that first park. My phone rang off the hook. About 2 months later, a guy from Florida who owned a small park outside of Peoria said, "Hey, I saw your listing in Taylorville. I own a small park outside of Peoria. Would you have interest in it?" So after I got that second call, the light bulb, ding, went off. I ordered a mailing list of every mobile home park owner in Illinois and Indiana. And I sat down and I just started writing letter after letter after letter. And, fast forward now 6 years, here we are.
So, John, tell me about your business today then, since you kind of gave us a quick version of how you built it. I think you've listed over 100 parks, several millions in parks. Like what's your sort of day-to-day look like? What's your transaction volume look like? And then where are you primarily focused?
Yeah. So in the last 4 years, I've probably listed 110 parks, probably around 120 or 25 in total. Right now, I probably have 40 to 50 listings that encompass everything from mobile home parks to self-storage, to some multifamily, to some senior housing, to land, some hotels. So I feel pretty comfortable in all those asset class. For the most part, anything that's cap-based or income-based, all those properties for the most part are fairly similar, and I feel comfortable in my ability to sell those. I will say probably the thing that helped me out the most when I was a pig farmer, I had a very good mailing list. And I would send out 4-color catalogs twice a year, but I knew the importance of that database and that mailing list. So as I got into real estate, I would just start taking every single person who had inquired about a property. I would harvest those emails and start to build my email lists. And as I would get more and more listings, I would just keep sending them. And fast forward now to today, I've got over 29,000 active investors on that email list.
John, it's interesting to hear you say that. So I own several mobile home parks, all of them in the Pacific Northwest. But before I bought my first park, and I've shared this many times on the podcast, I went on LoopNet and just pulled up every single mobile home park listing in the country that was on there. You had obviously many of those listings. And so I would email every one of those brokers, and I ended up getting on every one of those lists. And so it's kind of interesting. For me, it was a learning opportunity because I was shifting out of mixed use and small multifamily into the mobile home park space. And I just didn't know what I didn't know. So I would get on there to look at the financials, but also to build relationships. And I wanted to be on your list and every other broker's list just so I had access to those deals. And it's interesting here on the other side of that saying, yeah, I built a 29,000 person email list, right?
And now it's to the point, I was writing a lot of letters before, and I'm probably going to do another bulk campaign here sometime this spring. But now every time I send out a bulk email, I almost always get a call or two, hey, I've got a mini storage, or hey, I've got a mobile home park. Do you have interest in it?
Well, your list is so valuable. So John, going back to the lettering thing, like we've had, I think it's Justin Donald talking about off market and lettering and the effectiveness of that. And I'm really curious, like, what do you get for results for lettering? And like, was that, you rushed over really quickly. Was that a key component of building the business in the beginning? You talked about lettering multiple parks. Like, what did that look like? What did you say to sellers? Because in the end, like I'm an investor, right? I want to find our off market deals. So like, part of me asking this question is selfish because I'm like, me and the listeners, we want to know, like, how do we get a date with that seller? What do we say? What does that look like? Obviously, your message is a little bit different on the broker side, but like maybe talk about your letters. Or do you have it down to a science, like the color of the envelope and what you say, and if it's handwritten or not, or maybe just dive into that for a second?
Well, I will say, when you send out a letter, you're going to open that if you're in the world of real estate, because you don't have many guys sending you a corn logo. So I think the success, my mailers and my open rate was significantly higher than most, just out of pure curiosity. People going, who's this Mr. Landman? Who's John Fisher from Champaign, and why is he sending me a letter? So I did have one guy actually tell me, I've been receiving letters to sell my mobile home park for years. And he goes, but I got your letter and you can always trust a farmer. So I want you to sell my park for me. That's a direct, honest quote. So, sometimes sticking out like a sore thumb can be a good thing. And I'd like to, let on that I was genius and that it was, well planned, but I just kind of fell into that. So
I would argue that standing out is a good thing all the time. And this is a busy, loud, noisy world where, we own parks and we get letters and calls constantly. And, people hire a VA and, hello, I would like to buy your park, right? And it's click because you're the 10th one I got today. So I do love that. And I love the corn thing because I'll admit, like, I get a lot of emails and I get a lot of letters, but when you see the corn thing, you like stop and you pay attention. So that is genius. And there are some parallels for those of you that are looking for deals. So that would, learn from that when you're looking to buy deals, but also those that are starting their thought leadership. We talk a lot about in the R1 framework and with our elites, as you're going to start building sort of maybe a boutique private equity, you're going to partner people with capital. We always talk about just let people know what you're doing. Be excited about it, be passionate about it, but definitely always find ways to stand out and be unique, because that's going to get callbacks. That's going to get people emailing you back. That's going to and activity generates results. So
John, are you still just focused in the Illinois and Indiana markets?
I'm licensed in 25 states at this point. I've got current listings all the way from Maine to Oklahoma to Texas. I've got a pair of listings coming on today or tomorrow in Florida. So I'm, while the vast majority of my listings are still predominantly in the Midwest, as my name gets out there, my reputation gets out there, they're starting to kind of go out further and further.
how do you get licensed in 25 states? My wife's a realtor in Oregon and Washington, and it's like a pain in the ass to maintain those licenses in just 2 states. Is there like reciprocity in between states? How does that work? I'm just curious.
I have a very good spreadsheet for continuing education. A lot of the electives will transfer to multiple states. I do have to do a lot of mandatory courses. So typically in respect to my licenses and continuing education, I basically January 2nd, get through the new year, I start doing my continuing education. This is kind of my slow time, January, February. So I try to get the, 95% of my continuing education knocked out before I get into March and things start to pick up, especially residentially here locally. So the reason why I got my license in all those states, one, there's only so many mobile home parks in Illinois and Indiana. And I'd been approached by a firm that had $2 billion in equity behind them that were looking to get into the mobile home park space. And I'm like, well, if they've got $2 billion to spend, I need to try to get licensed in as many states as possible so I can not have to just get a 20% referral or something like that. But the funny thing happened, I had not been in real estate very long. Like I was only 2 years in, there's still people like, well, I didn't have a great resume. But by the time I started getting all these licenses in all these states, it probably made me look more qualified than I actually was, just having those credentials in my email block. So I just kind of kept going then as I kept getting more listings. So
John, I have a question in regard to, so you have this large email list, but I'm curious about the buyers. I mean, are you typically working with, a handful or maybe a multiple handful of investors that are buying multiple parks throughout the country, or a lot of these one-offs? And then I'm also curious about the sellers of these parks. Are these typically mom and pop type sellers, or are these also investors that own multiple parks?
yeah, so it pretty much covers the full gamut. A lot of the listings I get are the smaller parks, the mom and pops under 40 pads. I have sold some institutional parks. I've sold some, over 100 pads, but for the most part, they've been the mom and pops. So something with my approach or my letters or what have you have resonated with a lot of older individuals or older owners where they feel comfortable with me. And of course, now at this point, I can simply just point to my track record and say, hey, I've listed over 100 of these. This is kind of what I do. I'm pretty good at it. And this is what I feel I can do for you in your park.
Yeah. And then what about on the buyer side?
So on the buyer side, I get a lot of first timers. There's a lot of new people out there, and that's great. It's good to have enthusiasm and people coming in. And with the type of parks I sell, with me selling a lot of smaller parks, a lot of times these mom and pops, I get these 10, 15, 20 pads that are great starter parks for these first-time investors. So it's kind of a good fit there. I do have some larger groups, some very wealthy individuals, some equity funds, et cetera, that I know that are on my list. But for the most part, I'd say the majority of my buyers are small to mid-size.
Remember Cadia Capital Group.
Yep.
So just a dovetail
Say it
off
like
of that.
8 times.
Yeah. Remember Cadia Capital Group. So the dovetail off that though, so you mentioned you have a lot of first time buyers. We have a lot of listeners that don't have a property yet, or maybe they just have a couple. We have others that are further along in their scale journey. How can a buyer get your attention, right? Because like I mentioned in the intro, I know, especially with the mom and pops, a lot of times they might not want to list it on Crexy or LoopNet. Maybe they do, but oftentimes they don't because they don't want their tenants to find out. So you sort of, brokers like you that are active have access to sort of pseudo off-market listings, right? So how does a seller get your attention? You mentioned there's a lot of enthusiasm with first-time buyers. I don't know if that was tongue-in-cheek, a little sarcastic, because,
At times, yes, at times.
Yeah, Mitch was a broker and, someone's like, hey, I watched this Bigger Pockets episode and I'm going to buy real estate. I want to sit, and you also only have so many hours in the day and you don't want to waste your time either. So how can a seller communicate to you that they're serious? Buyer. Thanks, Mitch. Thanks.
The best way is to build rapport with me, and the best way to build rapport is to call me on a property and ask intelligent questions on it. If you just send me an email, say, hey, I'm looking for my first mobile home park. Here's my buy box. If you get anything in this, let me know. I get 5 or 10 of those emails a week. I can't remember them all. And with 29,000 investors on my list and buyers, I kind of need to share them with everyone and not just one or two, just to be fair to all parties. Because I've had guys been buying parks off me now for over 5 years, and they've been good customers, and as much as I would like to sell everyone a park, everyone pretty much needs to have their chance to do so, to be fair. So I don't do a lot of off-market listings. A lot of people don't know off-market listings. The majority of states are illegal. So if I run into a situation where the owner doesn't want the park to, be known, there's ways that I can do that confidentially, with the address being redacted, et cetera. And I would prefer to do it that way and sending it out in bulk as opposed to just making 1 or 2 calls. Now, have I done that? Have I just made 1 or 2 calls? Sure. We've all done that. We know we have ideal candidates for it. Maybe someone has bought 2 parks off you within a 25-mile radius within the previous couple years, and, they're going to take it.
So guys, remember, listening, pick up the damn phone. I think we hide behind digital. We hide behind email. Gosh, there's no replacement sometimes just for an old-fashioned conversation. So you mentioned that's how buyers get your attention. Pick up the phone, call. Oh, by the way, ask intelligent questions. That's important. I mean, we have people in our elite program that don't have any properties at all, but they're calling brokers and asking about what income's capitalized and not capitalized, park-owned homes versus tenant-owned homes, infill. They're asking intelligent questions because they've been part of our program and they've been listening to how we approach it. Also, though, I guess a follow-on question, how can a buyer or a seller for that matter, how can they be easy to work with, right? Because people like to do business with people. You want to work with people that are easy to work with. Obviously, if you're a buyer, don't retrade, which means you're basically jacking the seller around on price for no real good reason. How else can buyers and sellers be easy to work with a broker like you? So you think about them the next time because they're easy to work with.
Easy to work with, but I also had the same question, like what would somebody call and say that might actually grab your attention? You have this 29,000 person list, they call, and what would an intelligent or a standout question be where you're like, this is interesting. This is someone that is probably serious about buying a park? Because we have a lot of experience and new investors in our group. We have some listening live right now on this call, and I'm sure they're wondering that exact question, like, how do I stand out of those 29,000 people to get John's attention and to let John know I'm serious?
Right. And then follow on question, how can they be easy to work with? So I love that question. Start with that one.
So, something like, hey, John, my name's Mr. Buyer. I've been looking to get in this mobile home park asset class for a while. I've got about $400,000 to $500,000 I can put down. These are kind of the areas I'm looking for. I want a park that's, pretty, easy to start with. I don't want to take on too much value add my first park. I just want to learn the ins and outs of it. I mean, if you say something like that, and then I could say, well, hey, I've got this park, this park, this park. Or if they call and say, hey, I've already got a relationship with the lender, I'm basically approved for this amount. It's when you call and you've not done any of that. You might only have enough to put 10% down. You don't have any lender contacts. And that makes it challenging. Occasionally we'll get sellers that will do some seller financing. Sometimes, you'll get really lucky and they might do all the seller financing, but that's pretty rare. Especially in my case is dealing with a lot of older sellers, in their 70s or 80s. And at that point, they really just want out. They want safe.
So John, that kind of led to my next question was going to be, the majority of the transactions that I've done have been seller financing. They've all been low and no money down seller financing, 90 to 100%. And usually it's been men and women in their late 60s, 70s, even 80s sometimes that want to carry financing. They don't want to pay that huge capital gain.
Well, you're right. So we do see that from time to time. There's also the other ones that are like, man, I'm 84. I just want my money. They just want out.
I'm curious from your perspective, because I've purchased a lot of off-market, but also on-market, and way more success in the off-market stuff with the seller financing and building those relationships. But I do know some of our elite members and some of our listeners, especially because, I just preach seller financing all the time. How does one ask a broker that question and come across serious? I even think about like myself with purchasing a lot of these no and low money down seller financing deals. That's always a genuine curiosity and question of mine is like, hey, is the seller in a position and is the seller interested in carrying financing? Because I know for some brokers that may come across as, not a serious question, or, hey, I don't want to put a lot down. But I'm on the other end going, I don't want to put a lot of money down. I want great term. And I purchased a lot of properties with great term. So how does a newer investor kind of have that conversation with a broker?
Well, first off, I'll be the first to let you know, 99% of the calls I receive ask about seller financing. It's very rare that I have a call that they do not ask for seller financing. It's very common. And, so basically I would say my sellers are not in a position to do so. My sellers have no interest. Or if, they kind of give me the idea that there might be some flexibility there, I'm like, hey, I'll be more than glad to present offers. Let's put it in front of them and let's see what they say. I've always been of the mindset the worst that a seller will tell you is no. So I like to put it in front of them and let them make that decision. But there's a lot of them are steadfast. We are not going to do seller financing. And it's those individuals that keep on, trying to poke the bear on those transactions when the sellers have no desire to do it. It's just not going to go anywhere, and it doesn't go very far with me either.
What if a buyer comes in and says, I'm willing to pay more?
Yeah, and we've had that. We've had that exact scenario happen, and I've taken it to sellers, but they're adamant and they just don't want to hold paper. As a broker, I love seller financing, especially when they're doing all of it. If there's no appraisal, I don't have to worry about it. Things close quicker. It makes me get my check faster.
So, John, I got another question. So this is, you might have to think about this for a second, but I'm just curious. You talk to a lot of sellers. Other than price, what's the most common thing sellers want out of a transaction?
In most cases, just price. There's occasionally some sellers that are thinking big picture and like Travis said, they want to get good deals and structure them so their taxes are, not all going to Uncle Sam in year one. So, they might ask for my opinion on the best way to structure that. Was that a 3-year balloon, 5-year balloon, 7-year balloon? I had one lady, she had a small 10-12 pad down by St. Louis, and she was in her late 70s or early 80s. And we basically set it up for her where, she was going to get her payments every month for 7 years, no balloon. And then she was completely done. And so that during the twilight of her years, she may or may not outlive the 7 years, but she's going to have really good income for the next 7 years.
What about besides owner contract terms? Like say someone's approved with the bank, they're coming in as a cash buyer. What else is important to a seller besides price? Is it ease of transaction? Is it the higher likelihood of closing?
Yeah, absolutely. The highly likelihood of closing, feeling comfortable with their ability, feeling comfortable with the financing in place with the lender. And if you're a buyer, don't come in with a ridiculous due diligence period request. I've had multiple offers within the last month as long as 180 days due diligence for a 15 to 20 pad mobile home park.
Is this difficult across the board? No, what is it? What's a reasonable due diligence period? Is it 60 days, 45 days?
30 to 45 days. You should be able to do everything you need to do in 30 to 45 days. And if you're worried about, not everyone gets a phase one or, environmental reports or any other third-party reports. And if you're worried about that, we can put an automatic 15-day extension if the third-party report's not back by the end of the due diligence. There's lots of things we can do. And in most cases, most sellers are reasonable. And if the appraisal's not back or the third-party reports aren't back, very seldom will you have a seller just pound his fist on the table and say, no, we're not going to extend this. You can prove that, in good faith that things are moving forward. In most cases, that deal will keep going.
Yeah, we've written offers where it might be, 30, 45 days, but there's a carve-outs or exceptions for third-party reports that we're waiting on. And I think that's always a reasonable ask. And also, just for those of you that are listening, if you have reasonable asks as a buyer and the seller strong arms you and they're difficult right on the front end, it's going to be a difficult transaction for you too, right? And if they're stubborn and they're not going to budge, how can a buyer communicate that they have, besides they've got cash, besides that they've got sort of a pre-approval of the bank, how else can they signal to you that they're a serious buyer, there's a high probability of closing, they can get the deal done? What other things can they do when they're introducing themselves to you for the first time to give you that confidence that you can sort of take that back to your seller along with an offer?
Sometimes I think it's just our initial gut reaction. After doing this now for 6 or 7 years, I like to think that I can weed out the pretenders from the players. Occasionally one will get past the goalie, so to speak, and we'll go under contract with someone. And within the first 48 to 72 hours, when you start seeing their DD questions that, oops.
Yeah. John, I have to ask, so you've done this, 6, 7 years now, a lot of transactions, you're licensed in 25 states. I'm curious to what your personal real estate portfolio looks like. And do you personally own mobile home parks? Since you're kind of in that game, are you picking and choosing and own a few yourself?
Yeah. So right now I do own part of one mobile home park in Iowa. I'm completely passive on it. I basically put the deal together and got 10% equity in the deal for putting it together. I own part of 4 mini storage facilities at the present time. I have my condo. I've got a single family rental in Irmo, South Carolina. I just purchased in November. So I was basically, when I closed my business up, I had some debt that I had to restructure. So it took me a couple of years to kind of do that. So now I'm doing pretty well in the world of real estate and looking to invest some more. And I do plan on getting into some other mobile home parks. I do not have the time, nor do I have the desire to manage them. So I'm looking for passive situations. But also right now, I know in my personal life, speaking farm related and my desire to have the family farm someday, I need to have investments that are primarily myself where I can go in and pull equity out, sell them, just have the flexibility to do what I need to do if and when the opportunity to buy the farm comes. So I'm doing things a little differently. And, at this point, I'm 52 years old. I don't want to say I'm not going to be aggressive or take some risk, but starting over at the age of 44 taught me a lot. So I'm perfectly content with being somewhat conservative at this stage of the game. Now, if my son's 25, if he wanted to get into it, I would be giving him different advice than what I'm probably giving myself right now.
What advice would you give your 25-year-old son I don't know if he's involved in investing now, if he said, Dad, I want to start investing in real estate, whether it be mobile home parks or a different asset class?
Yeah. Well, with his financials, I mean, like a lot of us or a lot of people do, you're going to have to start probably in, single family homes and start cutting your teeth there. I know that's not ideal and not the fastest way to amp up, but for someone with no experience in real estate, I see no problem with someone, buying, a handful of single family homes just to kind of get their sea legs. And if things go right, they gain some equity and maybe they sell those 3 homes and have a couple $100,000, then they can sell those and put them into a mobile home park and then start stair stepping up as they do these 1031s for years to come.
Gosh, it sounds like that book.
Yeah, John, there's a book back here. Send me your address. I'll send you a couple copies for you and your son. We talk a lot about that though.
We should send them a couple copies. And I was going to say, I would have translated that as, hey, go back and listen to every 0 to 100 podcast episode. And
there you go. Yeah. Well, to give some context, we have, 0 to something strategies, which is sort of the phase 1 of our framework, like single family house hack, plexes, maybe even live in one side, rent out bedrooms, from there, get some equity, parlay that equity into maybe a small commercial asset to learn about force appreciation, cap rates, like some of the more nuanced sort of metrics around commercial real estate, niche down on an asset class, but every step of the way, we're talking about, like you just said, how can you build equity in an asset? How can you tap that equity? And there's multiple ways to do that. And how do you use that to sort of start scaling bigger, higher cash flow properties, et cetera? So yeah, I love that advice. But so I think we kind of answered the question I asked earlier about how can a buyer be easy to work with? So come ready, come with the cash, come with the relationships with the bank. Don't inundate your sellers with a bunch of dumbass diligence requests.
Yeah, that's the key one is having legitimate due diligence expectations. I'm very forthcoming in all my advertising and OMs. Hey, Mr. Buyer, Mr. and Mrs. Seller here have kept all the receipts in a shoebox. This property is probably not going to be financeable. So then if you start coming in and you're like, I want the last 2 years of bank records. I want the last 12 months of electrical and water bills. And when, these people are in their 80s and don't have the internet, it's going to be hard to produce a lot of that stuff. And when you put that out there and you're honest with them to begin with, and then they send you all these lists, you're like, dude, did you even listen to the conversations that we had?
Well, you got to be careful not just to take a template, right? Like, I mean, we did this in the beginning where we just beat up a seller. I mean, we remember the first RV park, Trav, even in the local area here, we were so maniacal. And in reality, we could have put together the deal. It fell apart for other reasons.
I think I was reasonable. I think you were being really difficult in that transaction.
Well, you were dangerous. That's what you were. You were excited and dangerous. And so I was probably too maniacal. So anyway, I think we've come to a place though where it's like you read the seller, you read the situation, you also accept some risk. We had a park the other day we bought in Wisconsin. We bought where it's like some of the rent was in cash, and she's like didn't have proof of that. Well, I'm like, okay, I can read this gal. She seems like a really good gal. Worst case, she's lying to me. It's still a good deal. So like making those calls, I think
we call that shoebox.
Yeah.
We call that shoebox underwriting too, where Mitch and I have sat in literally the dining room of a seller and she dumps out the shoebox on the dining room table, and you take it and you rebuild your own profit and loss statement. And maybe you ask some questions, but also you can call the utility companies and find out what water and electricity costs. Like, you can do some homework too.
So I actually sold a park last month. We closed on it last month. 60% of the revenue was cash. He owned multiple parks. The other parks weren't like that one, but just the way everything lined up in this park, 60% was cash. So we actually had to open up a bank account for him to deposit the cash. We went out 6 months so we could get it sold and financed, and it closed just last month. So
you know how to work with those situations. So I've got another question. You've worked with a lot of buyers and sellers, a ton of transactions. I'm curious on the negotiation side. Do you have any like unique examples of creative negotiations, either from the buyer or the seller?
Well, and sometimes as a broker, especially when I'm working in a dual agent capacity, I can't become too overly involved in situations like that, because at that time I basically become Switzerland. I'm neutral. I'm a facilitator. I'm a paper pusher. I'm not advocating for either side. I just want to get the deal done and keep it organized, so we keep getting closer to that finish line. However, as being dual agent and kind of knowing what a seller might be open to, I can kind of make suggestions to the seller, like, hey, would you be open to such and such? And then if they say, yeah, I might be open to that, then I can go to the buyer. I'm like, well, here we are. This isn't exactly what you wanted, but we're getting closer. They're giving a little bit here on their side. Can we find some middle ground that can kind of work for both parties? And a lot of times we can find some middle ground especially on terms. Sometimes it's still the bottom line is always price, but we can get close. And I know by the fact that being a dual agent, I have kept deals together that if there was another broker involved, would have died.
John, I have a question for you. I'm curious to where you think the mobile home park, as an asset class, where the mobile home park space is going. And I want to preface with, I feel like, the mobile home park space was not a sexy asset class for a lot of years. And then you had investors starting to buy, these last 10 years, really buy a lot of mobile home parks. And it kind of became a sexy asset class. And over the last several years, I've really seen, cap rates coming down. I've seen the returns shrinking. Obviously when interest rates were low, there was a lot of aggressive buyers in the market, and obviously sellers as well, because they were able to get top dollar. I guess that being said, there's still access to capital. There's access to financing. Where do you see the mobile home park space growing? I feel like it's been getting more and more competitive these last several years. But from your perspective, what do you see?
Yeah, so I think it's probably backed off a little bit since 2022. I think that was the height of it when interest rates were low. I just don't think it's mobile home parks. I think a lot of investments in real estate have kind of gone that route as the interest rates have gone up. Once we hit that fourth quarter of 2022 and it just went a completely different direction. I do think mobile home parks are going to continue to be popular. I've got 29,000 investors on my list, and there's only 40-some thousand mobile home parks nationally. So, that answers your question right there. There's going to be plenty of demand for these parks. So if you're a buyer out there, if you find a park that you like, when the residential real estate market was really tight here, a year ago or so, and homes were selling like the second they were coming on, we used to tell buyers, if you sleep on it, you might not sleep in it. That's almost the same with the mobile home park. If you find a mobile home park you like, you better get that thing under contract as soon as you can, because there's still a lot of people out there looking. And granted, there's a lot of people that are being a lot more careful, especially with today's interest rates, and or trying to negotiate terms so they don't come together quite as quickly as they were in 2022. But there's also a lot of people in 2022 that bought parks for a lot more money they should have. And now those arms are going to be coming due here really quick, and they're going to have a very, very difficult time getting those parks to cash flow.
What's your favorite asset class, though? So you're involved with self-storage, mobile home parks, RV. I think you also sell apartment complexes. If you're putting your investor hat on, and we have listeners that are trying to sort of niche down an asset class, what are you excited about? What are you seeing?
Well, they're all pretty much the same. I will say I enjoy selling RV parks just because they are so different. You're dealing with a lot of times completely different buyer. You're looking for someone who's looking for a lifestyle change. Perhaps they live in California or some other political environment where they're not happy and they want to move to another state and just completely change their life. And I love dealing with those people because although money is important and the cash flow is important, it's more of a lifestyle for them. And it's easier to strike up a relationship with someone like that because
these are people that are going to live in the parks they own, or these are people that are going to buy.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, there are investors out there that are looking for parks they will never, hardly ever step foot in. But there's a lot of individuals that are, husband and wife, married in their 40s and 50s, just want to change a life. And they'll just go buy an RV park somewhere. And I love dealing with those people because you develop a relationship with them. You get to know them better because it's more than just the money with them. I guess the properties I enjoy selling the most, and I love a lot of my mom and pop parks and the owners of them. They're great people. They're a lot like my parents, but from an ease of selling standpoint, if you've got one of those 50 plus pad parks that's owned by a medium sized investor that owns multiple parks, that has property management software that can just, print me out all the reports, and that makes my job so much easier. And I feel like I can more accurately represent the property.
On the RV parks, are you selling mostly like nightly stay? Gabe owns a nightly stay RV park. Mitch and I own a nightly stay. We've also been involved with like a longer term. Some of our mobile home parks have a longer term RV component, which depending on the area can be great or absolutely awful. So what are you selling nightly stay, long term, medium term?
Seasonal, monthly, overnights. So yeah.
The destination type or roadside type traveling parks, et cetera. I asked about the asset class. You talked about being dual representation. Do you ever just do buy side? Like if someone comes to you and say, hey, John, I'm looking for you to represent me. I want to go buy a park.
And in the world of commercial real estate, in most cases, the listing agent is not offering a ton of cooperating compensation to the buying agent, myself included. I learned really fast with some of the big commercial real estate brokers that have a lot of letters in their names, didn't particularly offer a lot of compensation. So after I started getting my listings, I pretty much did the same. One, it helps in a couple different ways to my sellers, and sometimes they're a little dubious, but I have to let them know that sometimes it's in your best interest to have me representing both sides just so I can keep the deal together, because I know that I've kept deals together that if there was other agents involved, there was enough hair on them that they were going to fall apart. But also you run into situations, especially in some of these smaller parks, where you might run into a residential realtor who's got a first cousin that has $100,000 and he wants to buy his first park. Well, he doesn't know much about parks. She doesn't know anything about parks, but she's only sold homes her entire life. And those situations are not very pleasant to be in either. So
I could say as a buyer, buying a park that's lit, maybe we see this locally, like on the MLSs here. But when there's a residential broker that doesn't know anything about mobile home parks or apartment complexes or RV or self-storage, and they're resident and they're used to selling, the houses and the three, there could be opportunities. I hate to say it, but we bought a park that was being listed by a residential broker, and they didn't even understand what a cap rate is or NOI or what the potential is of market rents and the upside. So we made a lot of money on that deal. We did really well. Right. Well, if you're a seller, man, if you're like a patient and you would need brain surgery, you're not going to go to a foot doctor, right? If you want to list your park, go to a guy like John, like a guy that understands these things, has the buyer relationships, understands what's market, what's a reasonable request, what's not, how things are valued, what the upside looks like, how they can communicate that upside to prospective buyers and investors, speak the language, not talking about, are they going to go with beige colored paint, and the sewing machine's going to go in the guest room, right? That's great, again, for residential, but not when you're selling a commercial asset.
Yeah. And sometimes, people just, they feel comfortable with what they know. And I'm out of state. So I'm sure I've lost listings because I'm out of state. And, there's some realtor that, went to their church or, worked out with their wife at the YMCA or something like that. So, I mean, there's a comfort level there. But you look at some of these people who get listings, and even locally, there's commercial properties that are listed daily that I don't get. And you look at the realtors who get those, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to them, but they don't have the background needed to represent that property.
But also shame on the realtor. Like if I'm a realtor and I don't know anything about mobile home parks or, large complexes, apartment complexes, and someone wants me to list it, I'm not doing my seller a service there. Yeah, drop the greet, do a referral to a guy like John, take a referral fee and stay in your lane. That's why we like, telling people to niche down on their asset class. Like if you stand for everything, you basically stand for nothing. Just like pig semen, go niche. So I guess we asked about this a little bit, but so we saw the, interest rates are really high. It's been a tough market for buyers and sellers. Like, what are sellers? Are you starting to, because I think at one point there was a bit of a standoff, right? These sellers were getting called for years. Like you said, 22 is the hike. Oh, your park's worth, $5 million or $4 million. You can get $78,000 a pad, and there's buyers everywhere. And so then they start spending their money. They start spending their equity, right? Oh, I don't owe anything on this park and it's worth this much. And then all of a sudden the bottom drops out. The rates get jacked up faster than, in several decades. Buyers or sellers, still had this sort of understanding, or they believe their park was still worth this. And as everybody knows, interest rates really does drive cap rates, which drives valuations. And then you have buyers saying, I can't make this work anymore at this price. It's not worth this. And so there was sort of this the standoff. Are you seeing that starting to break loose? Are you starting to see sellers maybe come back down to earth, getting more reasonable on their valuations? What's happening? And not just with mobile home parks, but just with commercial real estate in general.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, we had a huge re-education aspect that we had to do starting the fourth quarter of 22 and all of 2023 for the most part. I was having an absolutely monster 2022 year. Every single transaction that I had that was supposed to close in the fourth quarter of 2022 fell apart. Every single one. And, it would fall apart. And we'd try to come to the table. We'd renegotiate terms. And, it might take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. By the time you get everyone on the same table, they go back to the lender. Oh, rates go up again. And you start the whole process over. So, yeah, I actually had a period of early 2023 where, I was just absolutely so busy and so swamped 2022. And then here I am, the first month or two of 2023, and I'm on Facebook for a couple hours a day. It completely died. And I got a little depressed just because, I had my foot on the gas for so long. And then once the activity is not there, you're kind of like, what'd I do?
What about now? They're waiting for rates to come back down. Like what's happening?
Well, there's a lot of people that, they sell for various reasons, whether it's age, whether it's health. I mean, those people aren't near as concerned about the rates. They just want to get out at this point and get what they can get a fair price. There's clearly a lot of people out there that own real estate right now that are waiting for rates to come back down. I'm probably one of those with a mini storage that I'd like to sell in Kentucky. And hopefully that'll happen. That one we would not sell or finance. I might have another one. I might, though.
You don't need a down payment? 100% financing? Is that what you just said?
That's exactly what I didn't say. Yeah.
So what about now? That was 22, that was 23.
Most of I tell my sellers, I give them an idea of what I think the property is going to be worth. And sometimes they want a little bit more. And at this time, if I've already put 6 or 8 hours into the offering memorandum, I'll go ahead and list it, present all the offers. And sometimes the sellers are like, you were right. Well, I guess this is what the market is, and I want to sell. So, let's get the most out of it we can, and let's go with such and such offer. Other times they just dig in their heels and like, well, if I don't get it, I'll just, sell it next year or wait till rates come back down. So, I mean, the conversation I would have, like, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, through no fault of your own, your park is worth 30 to 40% less today than it was 6 months ago. I mean, that's basically what I would tell them. You guys have done nothing wrong, but, the interest rate's going from 4 to 7. This is what it's worth now. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news.
Or if you want to carry a contract, maybe you can have some flexibility on that price.
If you want to carry a contract for 5 years at 4 or 5%, we can get you that type of money.
Before we get to our final question, I know we keep saying one more question. I'm curious, specific to the mobile home park space, do you feel like nationally rents are below, pad rents are greatly below where they should be? I mean, we've had a massive surge in multifamily rents, but it doesn't seem like we've had that same uptick in the mobile home park space. Do you feel like nationwide pad rents are grossly under rented to where they should be in the market today?
Yes and no, and that varies a great deal by location. You can be in Illinois and you can be up by Chicago and have pad rates that'll probably be in that 600 to 700 range, and you can still find some pads in Southern Illinois between 100 and 150.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. So, but yeah, there's a lot that I think could probably be pushed. And when for years this asset class has catered to the low income, I think we want to keep it low income. I think a lot of the owners want to keep it low income because they want to be able to provide a service for that caliber of tenant. And if you press it up too much, they're not going to fit in there.
Well, also, are you seeing when you go to list a park, how do you come up with when you're presenting an OM, you're not saying, yeah, it's 150 pad, buy it up. You're saying, look, this is below market rent. like when we obviously look at other parks, what are they charging? We look at what's the next, like what's a 2-bedroom apartment? We take like 50% of that, sort of triangulate on what we think, the market could bear, and obviously, like used to your point earlier, what's reasonable and fair to our residents. How do you do that? How do you figure out what the market pad rent can be, and how do you, when you communicate that in an offering memorandum?
Well, a lot of cases our sellers are somewhat up to speed with what neighboring parks are selling or are renting for. So a lot of times I'll use that information. There's some people that the higher up ones, they'll have the JLT reports, and those are definitely convenient. There is some new software that I'm using in RVs, and they're working on the mobile home park asset class pretty soon. So they're probably going to have a list of all the amenities, everything that's offered, utilities, etc., and the rental rate. And that's going to be a program that's going to be nationwide. So I guarantee you, as soon as they're ready to come on, as much as the RV portion of their program is helping, I will day one sign up for the mobile home park, and that's going to help me a lot with the pad rental rates and my projections. So right now, if someone calls me to sell an RV park, I can type in their address. I can do a 50-mile circle. I can pull up every single RV park within that 25 or 50-mile circle. I have their rates, nightly, monthly, seasonal, their amenities, everything. And that's great to give the buyers, and it's also great to give the sellers to let them know how they kind of compare to their competition.
I think we'll get into the last question here, and I'm going to let Gabe ask this question before we get out of here.
Yeah, the same question we ask all our guests every week. If you were to lose it all tomorrow, so you don't have any of your assets, you also don't have any of your network. So we used to allow people to have their network, but that was too easy. And it sounds like you started from scratch before. So tomorrow, you're sitting on a buddy's couch, you've lost it all, and you have to start over. What's your first move?
That is a great question, and I hope I never have to experience that again, especially at my age. Boy, if I couldn't lean on my network, that would be challenging. I mean, I'm certain that I'm creative enough, and I guarantee you I'm hardworking enough and resourceful enough that I would kick, crawl, steal. I wouldn't steal, but just trying to think of adjectives to describe hunger and drive. That was an awful one to throw out there. I'd figure it out, but I would need a few minutes to think on that one.
Well, I think the one thing that's apparent with you, John, is you've got grit. I mean, you're scrappy. Like you went out and tried to get a job. You're like, whoop, pivot. That didn't work. I'm going to go build a newsletter. I'm going to build my database. So I think you would be just smart.
The first thing I would do, I would start writing letters.
Awesome. John, well, thank you. Awesome episode. Thank you for being on. Much appreciated. A lot of value there. A lot of golden nuggets.
Yeah. And I think in the show notes, I'll put how people can get a hold of you. I think, but do you want to just plug how people can get a hold of you outside of that, if they're listening in the car, et cetera?
Yep. MrLandman.com. MrLandman. MrLandman.com.
John, thank you so much, Mr. Landman. Appreciate you being on the show today. I think it was absolutely valuable and a nice departure from what we're normally doing. So a ton of value here, man. Thank you.
I appreciate you guys having me. Do it again sometime.